Hey class. So last time we started talking about the cardiovascular system and the heart and the blood vessels that make it up, and today we're going to spend more time going really in depth on the heart, its structure, and its functions. So here we go. So the heart is a large muscular organ consisting mostly of tissue that we call the myocardium. It's surrounded by a sac that's called the pericardium. It consists of two sides, a right and a left, that are separated by a septum, and then it's also split into four chambers. So you've got the two atria on the top and then the two ventricles on the bottom. There are two sets of valves. There are the atrioventricular valves, the ones that will separate the atria and the ventricles, and then also the semilunar valves, which are what control the flow of blood out into the body. The valves are what produce the lub-dub sounds, that sort of distinct sound. If you've ever listened to a heartbeat, as those valves close, that's where the sound will come from. So if we look at the external anatomy of the heart, you can see the vena cava, where the blood comes in. You can see the big aorta. So you sort of notice where the main supply where blood leaves the heart to go out to the body. And you'll notice those are very large to allow the supply to come in and out. And then, pulmonary arteries and veins where blood is going to the lungs and returning. You'll also notice what's important to notice here is the blood supply on the heart itself. So it's muscular, it's got to do a lot of function, it's going to need a lot of oxygen and gas exchange as it contracts to move blood, and so having a solid blood supply on the heart itself is really important. If we look inside the heart, we can start to see those the structures we were talking about. So we've got our two atria on top. We've got the atrioventricular valves that separate the atrium and the ventricles, our two ventricles here, and then the semilunar valve, which controls blood as it leaves the heart. You'll notice a lot of that cardiac muscle down here, and then we'll sort of get into some more details here. If we think about trying to visualize blood flowing through the heart, one of the things we can talk about, I'll put this up, and then I'll actually give you a diagram that'll show that a little bit, make it a little easier to see. So if you need to, you can pause it and make notes on this. Otherwise, let's look at the picture. So blood, unoxygenated blood, returns from the body through the vena cava, so the inferior and the superior. It comes into the right atrium. It will then go through the valve down into the right ventricle, and will eventually leave through the pulmonary arteries to go to the lungs. In the lungs, it's oxygenated, and now returns in veins. So remember, veins what bring blood back to the heart. It enters the left atrium, goes down into the left ventricle, and now will be pushed out through the aorta and allow it to go through arteries, out into the capillaries. Gas exchange can occur, nutrient exchange, and then it can come back through the veins, the vena cava, and repeat the whole cycle again. So how does the structure of the vessels and heart match their functions? So the left ventricle is much more muscular than the right ventricle because it must pump blood to the entire body. So as we were looking at those pictures, there's that huge mass of muscle down there at the bottom where the left ventricle is. The arteries are more muscular than the veins. We saw some of that last time because they're withstanding the high pressure from that left ventricle as it pushes blood out to the body. And then the veins have a thinner wall and a larger center to contain blood and allow all of that blood to flow back into the heart. So how does the heartbeat occur? How does this happen? So we talk about systole, which is when first the atria will contract together, and then it will be followed quickly by the ventricles contracting together. Then you'll have a period called diastole, which is a rest phase, when those chambers relax and return to their resting state. So this cardiac cycle, again, it's a cycle that's going to continue. It's our heartbeat, and the average is about 70 times a minute. That will change, as we'll see, during different situations. So what is the cardiac cycle? So again, we start with those the atria contracting. This will push the blood out of the atria down through the atrioventricular valves into the ventricles. And then you'll get, shortly after, the ventricles will contract. That causes those AV valves to close, which is when we hear that sort of the lub sound, the initial sound of a heartbeat. And that will push blood through the semilunar valve and out into the body. And then quickly after that, those valves will close. Now the heart is in diastole, so those ventricles are relaxing, and then we can repeat this cycle again and again. So how is it controlled? What allows this to happen in this sort of precise fashion? Well, there's special nodular tissue within the heart. It sort of serves a dual purpose as cardiac muscular tissue, but also has characteristics of nervous tissue. So it starts at the SA node in the right atrium. This initiates the heartbeat and is what causes the atria to contract. That sends an impulse that causes the AV node, which is also in the right atrium. It reaches there, and then it starts to send a signal down through an AV bundle and these Purkinje fibers that will carry down into the ventricles and cause the ventricles to contract. And these will travel between gap junctions at the intercalated discs. So we'll take a quick look at the picture of that here in a bit. So if we visualize it, so here's our SA node in the atria. It will send the impulse that causes the atria to contract. This signal also carries to the AV node, which can carry down through those gap junctions into the ventricles and cause the ventricles to contract. How's the heartbeat controlled? It's also controlled externally. So our brain and hormones in the body are able to cause the heart to increase its rate sometimes or slow down. But say you're doing exercise, say there's stress that causes the body needs more oxygen, needs more blood flow. External control of the body, the brain can cause that to happen. So those gap junctions, the big purpose here allows for the signal, the impulses to carry through, and also leaving some space allows those muscles, the cardiac cells, to be able to contract together, to contract in unison, and provide that strength of push we need for the blood. So what is an ECG, an electrocardiogram? It's how we can visualize the heartbeat. So when we have that first signal happen in the atria, the SA node, we will see what we call the P wave, and then you will see the contraction of the ventricles. We'll get a spike in impulse there, and then you can also see the recovery phase. So if we look at that in an image, when we get that first signal in the SA node, we see the P wave. As it makes its way down and causes the ventricles to contract, you get this QRS complex when those ventricles are contracting, and then you'll see this T phase or T wave as the ventricles relax. I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, let me know. Go through the readings, and we'll see you back in class.